The EU institutions, the way they're structured, the way they interact, it's not only undemocratic, it's downright anti-democratic. And on top of that, it's not a mistake they made, it is by design.
In this episode, I sit down with EU Parliament member Christine Anderson. She represents the Alternative for Germany party and is part of the Identity and Democracy group.
Everyone that is not in support of whatever globalist agenda is being advocated for or pushed at the moment is given the label far right.
We discuss the current cultural and political threats facing Europe, from surging immigration and anti-Semitism to censorship and the erosion of national sovereignty and identity.
We are so overrun, and it's almost like you have these parallel societies. On top of all of that, we are being taught to hate our own way of life, to hate our culture. Why would anyone want to integrate in a society that hates itself?
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. MEP Christine Anderson, such a pleasure to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, welcome to Washington, D.C. You've been very prominently speaking about the coronavirus pandemic and, of course, all the draconian measures that were associated with it. In fact, in the building behind you, we have a select subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic that's been doing a kind of an inquiry. And I understand there's a similar activity in the European Parliament that's happening. And also there's this European Citizens Initiative, which you pointed out is actually making some progress. So tell me about that.
Okay, so first of all, yeah, there was a committee set up in the EU Parliament. Fortunately, it was not an inquiry committee, so it was just a special committee. So we lacked certain competencies, for example, to actually compel someone to show up in the committee, which Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, and Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU Commission, chose not to honor, so they didn't show up. The title of that committee was Lessons Learned from COVID. But the thing is this, they were not interested in taking a look at where they went wrong. Was it okay for us to violate fundamental rights, to infringe upon them? No, what they were actually trying to look at, and they did, is where did we fail to get the people to do what we wanted them to do? So that's kind of what they were looking at. And you can see that from the report that came out of that committee and its findings. Despite all the lies we exposed, despite all the narratives that we uncovered that only served one purpose, that being of breaking people and forcing them into compliance, despite all of that we uncovered, they repeat every single lie in that report. This European initiative you were mentioning, there are 7 brave citizens, and they just, decided we will not tolerate this anymore, at least not without putting up a fight. And that's what they did. So it's an instrument that actually the EU Commission provides for citizens. That is like their, what somewhat desperate attempt to uphold the facade of being a democracy. And what it actually does, so you need 7 citizens, they need to be from 7 different member states, and they can petition the EU Commission. The hurdles they have to take on that, they're rather high. So once they have to submit it, EU Commission looks at it, and then they can decide, well, we won't accept that, or we will, or strike parts of it, and then they have to collect 1 million signatures. And once all of this is done, the only thing that these 7 citizens will be entitled to do, and the only thing that the Commission is obliged to do, is to have them come in and present their case. But that's it. EU Commission does not have to do anything. They're not obligated to act on it. Nothing like that.
But you seem excited about it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, it is nevertheless a great way of raising awareness of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And people will be, taken to the streets, having to collect these signatures. There's conversations going to be going on. Mm-hmm. So it's just, one more way of spreading the word. And this time it's, semi-official because it is a European Citizens Initiative. So yeah, we are hoping it will raise awareness, and we are hoping that all of this talk about WHO and granting them governing powers, we will actually be able to stop it.
A lot of people imagine that the European Parliament works much like perhaps the federal government would in the United States, right? And it actually works incredibly differently. And if you could just give us a picture of that reality. In fact, that's part of the reason why you wanted to become an MEP in the first place, I think.
The EU institutions, the way they're structured, the way they interact, it's not only undemocratic, it's downright anti-democratic. And on top of that, it's not a mistake they made. It is by design. The most important issue here, we're like a division of power. You know, that is like a fundamental principle in every democracy. You divide up the powers. So it's not the way it is with EU Parliament or EU institutions. So what happens is, let's say the German government wanted to pass a law. And the Bundestag, which is the democratically elected representation of the German people, said, no, we will not, you know, give it a go. We will not vote for that. We don't want this. The story would be at an end right then and there. Well, but now the German government, all it has to do is pretty much take that law, bring it on to the EU institutions, because in the council, which on EU level is actually the legislative, they will pass the law on EU level. And the thing is this, in the council, it's the members of the national executive. They're sitting in EU level passing laws. So there is no division of power. So they passed the very same law that they failed to pass in Bundestag in the council, because it's themselves passing it there. And then it has to come back and has to be put into a law in the national member states. So it has nothing to do with democracy. And to make matters worse, up until a few years ago, all the decisions in the council had to be reached unanimously. And they're trying to get rid of that. So what you will have then is whatever decision is taking there, let's say German government again wanting to pass a law, Bundestag says no, they travel to Brussels. And even if the respective minister votes no on that, if he's not a majority, then he will just be downvoted and the law will be passed anyway. What does that mean for the German people? They cannot, you know, run their minister out of office because he did what they wanted them to do, said no. And the other ministers that voted on that law, they never voted for that.
And basically, they have no recourse.
No recourse.
Right.
No, nothing, exactly. So, and that is actually nations ruling over other nations.
But let me ask, you know, I'm Polish Canadian, and the people that are anti-EU in Poland will say, well, actually, it's Germany and maybe a bit of France that really run the show. So, isn't Germany actually in a good position here?
We need to take a look at that. What does that mean when people say Germany is running the show or France is running the show? Or in Europe, you will have a lot of people say Americans are running the show. Are we talking about German people? Or are we talking about the German government? Are we talking about the French people or the French government? Are we talking about the American people or the American government? And at this point, no, it's not the people anymore. The people are not running any show anymore. It's the governments, and but they appear to be puppets for whoever is actually calling the shots and pulling the strings. It's not the American people. It's not the German people, because the peoples all over the world, we are pretty much sitting in the same boat, and we're up against the very same powers trying to infringe on our rights, trying to take away our democratic principles. That's what we're up against.
Before you went into politics, you were actually, you know, stay-home mom. What motivated you to jump in, first of all? And I mean, I think from the get-go, you came in with this idea that the EU was not a place that you wanted,
right,
a structure you wanted to see.
Well, I've always been interested in politics, even as a kid. Well, I remember I was like 7, 8 years old, and I used to watch these debates in the Bundestag, and I just loved it, you know, the way they came back and forth, and there were, you know, some serious verbal injuries they inflicted upon each other, and I just fascinated by that, you know, presenting the arguments and doing stuff like that. I also remember, it was like I was 9 or 10 years old. We lived close by to the Eastern German border, so we would pick up their TV signals. And religiously, I would watch the Black Channel every Monday night. It came on at 8:15. And it was pretty much scenes in Western Germany, and they would comment on it. For example, there was like a festival, and people were standing in line to get a bratwurst. And then their spin was, even in Western Germany, people are standing in line for food, and they may not get food, right? So fascinating, even back then, how you can take facts and spin it in such a way that it will fit your narrative. And then there was the year 2007, subprime crisis in the United States, and the devastating effects it had on all economies around the world. And I was like, what is going on? So we did a little research. The kids were kind of like in a place now where I did not have to do everything for them anymore. And I guess once you start going down that rabbit hole, you know, there is no going back. And I've always voted for the Christian Democratic Party in Germany and the Libertarian Party. You have 2 votes in Germany. And in 2005, I still did so. But 2009, I could no longer vote for them. I voted invalid. But that political homelessness is what I call it, that I experienced. I would have never thought that it would get to me, but it did. Not knowing who I was represented by anymore, not knowing, you know, who would be my voice in politics anymore. That really was a horrible feeling. So in 2013, I heard on TV a new party being founded. And I was like, whoa, what is this? EU skeptics, Euro skeptics. So I turned off TV, researched that party. I joined the party, filled out an application for membership. And it was actually an act of pure self-defense, becoming a member of a party and getting involved myself. Because the people I had trusted with to do that for me, I could no longer trust. So I decided to do it myself.
The AFD is characterized very often, I mean, certainly in American, let's call it legacy media, and a lot of media in Europe, as some kind of, you know, far-right extremist party. But that's not what you found in your research. And so just explain to me, maybe briefly, you know, what is the AFD actually about?
Okay, so the AFD is not far right. It's just we have been right so far. And the people are beginning to realize that. So any party that kind of criticizes government, questions the narrative, questions the current thing, you know, is considered to be far right, or, you know, even Nazis, or, you know, all these negative connotations. It is really, as soon as you start advocating for the people, which kind of is a job of an elected representative, as soon as you do that, of course, you will have to take an opposition to, I call them globalitarian misanthropists. There is a conflict of interest. And then they will throw at you whatever they have to, you know, possibly prevent people from even listening to you, you know. So that's kind of like how it's working. No, actually, when you look at my party's program, it says pretty much what it did in the program of the Christian Democrats, the former Conservative Party in Germany, and what it said in the program of the Libertarian Party, which is the Free Democratic Party, something like that. So we just stuck by our convictions and what their positions were like 10, 15, 20 years ago.
I'm thinking back to this graphic that Elon Musk popularized at one point, which was that he kind of stayed in one place. It's just the left shifted really far left. Is that right? What you think happened here? Or? Well,
yeah. Looking at the Christian Democrats in Germany and Chancellor Merkel, she was, you know, the head of that party. Who would have thought that the former Conservative Party would pretty much steal the Greens or to steal their topics from them? So it was that party that shut down all nuclear power plants in Germany, because of something that happened at the other end of the world. And just thinking, the German nuclear power plants, they were top notch in terms of security, the facilities and, all of the things we make sure that they were safe, right? Now we shut them all down, like I said, because of something that happened at the other end of the world. And we're buying now the nuclear power from, France and Poland, and which are not up to the security standards that the German nuclear power plants had. Then you look at, the marriage for all, right? It was the Christian Democratic Party actually kind of passing that in the Bundestag. So it's like they really took over from what the Greens were advocating for. But what they are saying about my party, apparently we have moved one notch more to the right. And we have moved to the right so many times. I guess we have been coming out at the left side again, right? So it's insane. But it's a narrative. It's to defame us. And it's to get people not to listen to us. That's what this is about.
What would you say is the most controversial platform position of the AFD?
Oh, gosh. Where do I start? No. They're bashing us for our, stance on immigration. Which actually isn't immigration, it's an illegal invasion at this point. I mean, we're talking about millions and millions of people here. So they're bashing us for this. Obviously, that's all racist and, the transgender madness. So it's pretty much whatever the narrative is. And we just pretty much just look at human beings as they are. And we have to make sure that our environment, our world, our societies are for human beings as they are. That is pretty much the problem with the left always. They think of this utopia, this perfect world, which actually is a dystopia. But the human being does not fit into that utopia. So what they have to do is they have to change the human being. They have to create this new human being that will fit in their, whatever utopia they're dreaming up.
Transhumanism comes to mind, right, as you're talking about this.
You actually don't even have to go there. I mean, just something very basic. Okay, so there's all this talk about xenophobia. Right? So people who are afraid of strangers, they're like despicable racists. But I mean, where did that come from? And looking at this, we literally raise and teach our children to be afraid of strangers. Why do we do this? To protect our children. Because our children do not have the means to distinguish, does this person mean well? Or does this person, will it harm me? What is that? It's a mechanism of survival, actually. So now as they grow older, they learn how to distinguish. They learn how to read, faces and all of that. But that does not necessarily hold true when we're talking about people that come from other cultures. We don't know their traditions, how they go about doing things. So to be afraid of strangers is actually a positive mechanism of survival. Take the next thing, loving your own more than others. That is not despicable. No, that is how it was ensured that the human race is still here even, because otherwise we would have been extinct. So can you really blame a mother for loving her own child more than the neighbor's child? Of course you can't. Does that mean that she hates the neighbor's child? No, it doesn't mean that at all. Does it mean that she won't feed the neighbor's child if the neighbor's child is in need? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But when it comes down to making a choice, will my child survive or the neighbor's child survive? She will always pick her own child, of course. Mm-hmm. And if that was not fused within our DNA instincts, then we would have been extinct a long time ago. So these are just very basic things that what human beings are about. There is lots more, of course, but yeah, it's like trying to change and shift that.
Well, there's also this issue, and of course, AFD and actually more and more people in Germany have been accused of being xenophobic. There's been this huge influx, right, from sub-Saharan Africa, from many places. I mean, like you said, millions and millions of people, and I think the concern is that has, unless those people are assimilating to the culture that is there, that can create a huge problem. And in fact, one of the things that I'm thinking about now is these, huge Free Palestine protests that we've been seeing in the last, since October 7th. And so, I think in London, it was 500,000 people. And what do you think of that?
Well, actually quite interesting to have seen that, because all of the, elected officials and politicians, they are now, what? We imported anti-Semitism? And I'm like, yeah, you think? So it's like, yeah, this is what's been going on, right? And now they're seeing it. They're flustered. How could that have happened? Well, I mean, if you import millions and millions of people from cultures that have deep-rooted anti-Semitism, that is what you get. That's exactly what you will get. In Germany, they're already spinning it in a way to shift the blame away from those that are actually out on the streets, literally calling for the genocide of Jews, to shift the blame, take it away from them, and once again blame the Western societies. So in Germany, they came up with this narrative, well, it is not their anti-Semitism, it's our anti-Semitism, because we have failed to integrate them. Seriously, this is how you spin this now?
Well, was there an effort to integrate? Because I mean, it's almost like, at least in Canada and America to some extent, with this sort of idea of multiculturalism, it was like, it was seen as a racist or some kind of anathema to even think of that. Like right? How could you try to assimilate them to our Western culture? Right?
I mean, first of all, the ones that a society wants to integrate, the condition on that is, or the prerequisite would be the people wanting to be integrated, right? And I will have to say, in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of Turkish people coming, and they wanted to work in Germany, and they did work in Germany, right? And the idea was actually they would come and stay for some time, work, and then go back. Well, that didn't happen, right? But now we are so overrun, and it's almost like you have these parallel societies. Why should they integrate? On top of all of that, we are being taught to hate our own way of life, to hate our culture. Why would anyone want to integrate in a society that hates itself? It's insane. It's absurd. Like I said, on the altar of diversity and kindness and what have you not, we're actually destroying our liberal and free societies.
In many Western democracies right now, many people have been shocked by the incredible levels of extreme anti-Semitism to the point of advocating for genocide and death and so forth that has been displayed, right?
Right.
And so I think you're arguing that this is a result of not having assimilationist policies or letting people in at all. Like, that's what I'm trying to understand.
Well, it's not only a result of not being able to assimilate certain population groups. I think it was yesterday or the day before, there was a hearing, I think it was in the Senate or Congress, and they were just asked a simple question. Would or does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your rules of procedure of harassment? Would that be considered harassment? And these representatives of these universities, they were not capable of simply saying yes. So they were kind of rationalizing it, going like, well, it depends on the context.
At MIT, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
If targeted at individuals, not making public statements.
Yes or no? Calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment?
I have not heard calling for the genocide for Jews on our campus.
But you've heard chants for intifada.
I've heard chants, which can be anti-Semitic depending on the context, when calling for the elimination of the Jewish people.
So those would not be according to the MIT's code of conduct or rules.
That would be investigated as harassment if pervasive and severe.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context. That is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill. So is your testimony that you will not answer yes?
If it if the
Yes
speech
or no?
becomes if the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? The speech is not harassment? This is unacceptable, Ms. McGill. I'm going to give you one more opportunity for the world to see your answer. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct when it comes to bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be harassment.
The answer is yes. And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, targeted at an individual.
It's
severe,
targeted at
pervasive.
Jewish students, Jewish individuals. Do you understand your testimony is dehumanizing them? Do you understand that dehumanization is part of anti-Semitism? I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric. When
And is it
crosses into
anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
What context do you need? You know, calling for the genocide of a people? Yeah, that is harassment. There's no question about it. You don't need any context. They were not capable of doing that. So, and it kind of, you know, begs the question, why? It might be Islamophobia. The ones that are not capable of calling or of considering the calling for genocide of the Jews as harassment, they're the ones that are afraid of Islam because they know perfectly well what representatives of Islam are capable of. Charlie Hebdo, remember? We had it in Denmark. There were flags burning all over because someone dared to come up with some caricature for Mohammed. These are the Islamophobes, the true Islamophobes.
I think casting a whole blanket across the entirety of the religion is way too far. Is that what you're saying?
It's the ideology that I fight. It's not the Muslims. They just want to live their lives. It's kind of like we are back to the incremental steps. First you put, you know, your daughter under a scarf, then it's a niqab, then it's a hijab, then it's, you know, as it moves along, that kind of thing. And we're seeing that in the Western democracies, actually, especially in Europe.
You know, when you're talking about the presidents of these Ivy League schools, this is all happening in a context of, for example, misgendering someone on those campuses is considered violence.
Exactly.
Like that is very overtly seen as something almost, I guess, worse than harassment.
Right. That's actually where I was driving at, is like the cognitive dissonance. For example, when you look at a very simple question, any 3-year-old can answer that question, what is a woman? But when you ask a politician, what is a woman, especially here in the United States. They seem to be having problems with that question.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition? No.
Yeah.
The only answer to that question would be a woman is an adult human female. They're not capable of giving that answer. So they're mumbling, you know, and that's that cognitive dissonance. They know perfectly well what the answer to the question is, but they don't want to give it out of fear of stepping on very small minorities' toes. So rather than stepping on, let's say, on the toes of 3, 4, 5 people, they sooner step on the toes of like what 98% of the people, right? And it's like I had a meeting last night. I met a senator, and the way he worded it, it was actually quite interesting. It was like, yeah, it's almost like they're working their way through a maze, and yeah, but this is. Like you said, consider harassment to misgender someone, or to, you know, maybe take objection to the fact that a man shows up in a woman's restroom. That is considered harassment, or even worse, hate crime, possibly even. But yeah, calling for a genocide of Jews, that's just somehow fine now? I don't think so.